Ladies and gentlemen, my very good friend from Sweden, Kjell Enhager. We first met on the fairway of Birkdale at the Open in 1998. Kjell, obviously friends of my caddy, Fanny Sunderson, she brought Kjell over to meet me. And so we met. Kjell said to me, record one of your good shots for me. So of course I go, oh yeah, well I hit this and it went like that. And he said, so how did you see it? Was it in the frame? I said, yeah. So was it color? Was it black and white? And so off we went. Now tell me about one of your bad shots. And of course, So anyway, all the time he's watching me. So I know you, the viewer, are going to find this absolutely fascinating. I'm going to leave you in his very capable hands while I go off and shoot some B-roll. See you.
Thanks, Nick. I take off from there, and I'm going to talk about how the brains work in 5 minutes. So just be with me, even though this is theory. I just try to picture, the brains, how they look like. We usually talk about the conscious part. We usually talk about the subconscious part, whatever that is. These plus and minuses actually symbolizes memories. And we have memories of pros and cons. It's called life, right? And here I pictured our 5 senses: see, hear, feel, smell, and taste. Now, you may ask the question, what has this to do with my golf? How can I improve my golf from this sort of theory? Well, 35 years ago, neuroscientists had 2 questions. And first question was, if you actually break your arm like this, is it going to compose a memory mark in your brains? In other words, you can saw it up and pick it up and can say that's a memory when you broke your arm. The second question they had 35 years ago was that if I break my arm in my fantasy, I just make up in my imagination that I break my arm, is that also going to compose a physical memory mark that you can actually touch? Long story short, I don't go through it, but the answer to both is yes. They noticed that if you break your arm, it has a component in your brain, and as well as if you just imagine, when you daydream, when we use our fantasy, we are actually creating memories in our subconscious or conscious. So how can we use this in our golf? Well, first just let me say this. If this is, for instance, my brain, and something outside here we call reality, right? And this is my eyes. When I look through my own memories, my own experience to reality, is it, what would I say? Is it feasible to say, is it okay to say that when I look to something and I have a lot of minuses, do I see problems or possibilities? Or if I have a lot of pluses, do I see problems or possibilities? The answer is obvious. So the question I ask you, what's the purpose of training? Well, that is to add pluses in this map, so you actually view everything as a more possibility than a problem. And the same counts for life, for that matter. So the question is, when I start to work with the Golf Girls 28, the national Swedish team of ladies, how can I help them so they deposit plus themselves and learn from minuses? Because if they do, they won't have to work with their self-confidence, self-worth, and so forth. So this is what we actually did. To begin with, I just would like to ask a very specific question. Do you have in your golf one golf hole where you know you always play good shot? And when you come to that hole, or you, for that matter, you bring up this club, it may be an 8 iron or whatever, you say, this is my good club, this is my best hole. I guess you jumped into a plus. What happens then? Or vice versa, do you have a hole where you say, oh, I hate this hole or I hate that club? If you take that memory, for instance, of a plus, every thought, what is that? It's a component of what you see, hear, feel, smell, and taste. And if that's true, we can actually work the other way around. We can start to deposit pluses that actually helps us to see possibilities, that helps us to act in the way we want and to get the results we desire. So how do we do that? When I started to look at this, I started to talk to very many neuroscientists, and they said, well, we have one function that you could call, I call this handyman. It could be a handy woman, of course, it has no gender as such. And it has sort of different function, and one is to have a flashlight where we always want to recognize ourselves. That means what the brains hate more than anything, as far as I know, is the unknown. So if you come to hole and you have never played it, it's hard for the brain to make out what you're going to do. So how do we do it? We use a fantasy, and that's this function here. This fellow I would call a lazy programmer, so to speak. This is your daydreamer. When you daydream, when you see something in your fantasy, you hear something, you say something to yourself, or you feel something, what do? You actually make a deposit in plus. How come that works? Because what neuroscientists believe is this function, the handyman, is not so intelligent. That means if you see yourself making a putt and you deposit a plus, the handyman goes down and says, have I putted this before? Yep, here's a memory and I have seen it go into the hole. That is what you see in your fantasy, you hear it hit the flag, and you get the feeling before you actually do the stroke. So that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's the basis of mental training in athletes.